Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And on we go with our study of the opening chapters, or the first introduction of Ibn Juzayy rahmatullahi alayhi to his tafsir, in which he has included 12 points of study in 12 abwab, and we have just completed one of those babs. The fourth bab is actually about 12 sciences which have relevance to studying the Quran, central to which of course is tafsir, right? So then he goes on to look at the reasons that Mufassirin disagree. Okay, now we have already seen in the previous chapter that Ibn Juzayy has told us that there are different types of disagreement, and some of that disagreement is genuine or substantial disagreement, right? And then this other disagreement which is merely different ways of saying the same thing, right? So he wants to focus now on the genuine disagreement and point to why these things happen, right? And that's actually something which is pertinent to the actual usul of tafsir, because this is a challenge that every mufassir is going to face when he or she comes to the Quran. What things they're going to be dealing with that could result in their conclusions diverging from some other interpreters, right? So this is an important piece of study. And then followed by this, following this is Al-Bab Sadis, which concerns the Mufassirin, so some aspect of the history of tafsir, and there he talks about some of the sources that the Mufassirin draw from in the tradition. Okay, and he doesn't make too much detail about how he draws from them, but we've touched on that, and we'll see those names again along with others.
الباب الخامس في أسباب الخلاف بين المفسرين والوجوه التي نرجح بها بين أقوالهم.
So you see here that when he's framing this chapter, he frames it in terms of tarjih, right? So he is talking in a sense about the method of interpreting, but he's looking at it from the angle of how we weigh up opinions that are advanced by the Mufassirin, right? By the same token, those same things we can say they are methods and tools that are being used by the Mufassirin to arrive at their conclusions. Then, when we are looking at existing opinions, those are the methods that we can use to evaluate those opinions. So it's just two stages, but it's the same set of tools in essence.
فأما أسباب الخلاف فهي 12. الأول اختلاف القراءات. الثاني اختلاف وجوه الإعراب وإن اتفقت القراءة. الثالث اختلاف اللغويين في معنى الكلمة. الرابع اشتراك اللفظ بين معنيين فأكثر. الخامس احتمال العموم أو الخصوص. السادس احتمال الإطلاق أو التقييد. السابع احتمال الحقيقة أو المجاز. الثامن احتمال الإضمار أو الاستقلال. التاسع احتمال كون الكلمة زائدة أو غير زائدة. العاشر احتمال حمل الكلام على الترتيب أو على التقديم والتأخير. 11 احتمال أن يكون الحكم منسوخا أو محكما. 12 اختلاف الرواية في التفسير عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وعن السلف رضي الله عنه.
Okay, so you can see he's given this in a very brief format, and this would be very rich for a dars to go through examples of each of these. And yet I'm not going to I don't intend to spend a lot of time on this. I'm concerned about just making sure you get the gist of the idea, and we're seeing how the translation is coming out of that. As for more expansive durus, inshallah, these will come in the future. Right, so there are 12 bases of disagreement, right? Sources of disagreement, causes of disagreement, reasons for is absolutely fine, okay? And the first of those is on the level of the qira'at. So it's interesting he's mentioned this first. Conceptually, that works quite well, because the idea is, before we get to interpreting the text, we are agreeing or disagreeing on what the text itself looks like, sounds like, right? So giving a simple example, because it's kind of the first thing to come up in the Quran. we have in the first few ayahs of the Fatiha, then Maliki Yawmiddin, right? So some of the qira'at, some of the qurra recited this as Malik, Maliki, right? And others recited it as Maliki Yawmiddin, right? So we have Maliki and we have Maliki. So before we get to what does this word mean, we have to first decide whether we are saying the same word or not. So some of the differences in qira'at are merely about pronunciation, right? So if they're merely about pronunciation, there will be no difference in terms of the tafsir, okay? Am I going to say huda or hude? Do I have some imala here or no imala? It's not pertinent to tafsir. But if I'm going to say Malik and Malik, well, this is two different words rather than just a different pronunciation. And then even then within the qira'at, there might be two words which are slightly different in word form, but then do boil down to the same meaning. Okay, so then there doesn't have to be a difference in the tafsir, right? But then sometimes they genuinely are two different words. Related, yes, but different words. And Malik is an example of that, right? Because they come from the same root, but they have different denotations, right? So they say that Malik is from milk, right? So ownership, Malik, then is ismu fa'il from that, and then you have a word which means owner, okay? And you can translate that otherwise as master. So master of the day of judgment, owner of the day of judgment, possessor, right? Malik comes from mulk. Mulk is dominion, sovereignty, authority, or kingship. So the Malik is the king, and it's not ism fa'il, but it's from this. It means king. So is there a difference between king and owner? There is a difference, not a difference that is a contradiction or tension between the two or anything that can't be resolved, nor is there any difficulty in simply saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Malik and Malik, and this ayah with its two qira'at or its qira'atain tells us both of these things, right? It just tells us in this qira'ah is telling us about his mulk, and this qira'ah is telling about his milk, or it's telling us about his malikiyah, his being Malik, and his malikiyah, being Malik. The ayah tells us both of those according to the authentically received qira'at. These are complementary. So there's no ishkal or difficulty in the matter, but the matter is appreciating that one qira'ah gives us this, and then the interpretation has to follow the word Malik, and the other qira'ah gives us this, and the interpretation has to follow the word Malik, right? So in this situation, we also can see that each of these qira'ahs is backed up by other ayat of the Quran. So in other places, there's agreement between the qurra on Malikin Nas, Ilahin Nas, right? So in Surah An-Nas, we don't have the two readings. Nobody says Malikin Nas there. It's Malikin Nas. So we know Allah Azza wa Jalla among his names is Al-Malik. And in other places they agree, Malik al-Mulk, Qul Illahumma Malik al-Mulk. There, although it's related to Mulk, the word is Malik. So the owner of the dominion, or the master of the dominion, right? So there is agreement amongst the Qurra that that word should be recited as Malik. So both of these names are accepted by consensus. And then in this surah, especially in the early stage, some of the Qurra who were authentically transmitting the Quran, they preferred the reading Malik, and some others preferred the reading Malik. And so there was sort of people gathered around, or there was conglomeration around these two readings. And then they both became within the collection of what's now the canonical readings. So they both became accepted as amongst the 7 canonical readings. And then when the 7 were extended slightly to become the 10 canonical readings. We touched on this before. At this point in time, it's no longer a case of, oh, do I prefer this one or do I prefer that one, right? So people didn't, Qurra, even authorities, didn't individually choose anymore. What they did was they settled on, well, am I transmitting through this route or am I transmitting through that route? If I'm reciting the qira'ah of this authority, of this person, then according to that, it will be Malik. If I'm reciting according to this authority, it will be Malik. So I'm completely at liberty to recite according to the qira'ah of Asim, for example, and I'm completely at liberty to recite according to the qira'ah of Nafi', for example, and that as long as I know that's what I'm doing. So the idea of sifting through all these different options individually, just sort of fell out of practice, right? And what became the case is we have now compiled qira'ahs, right? So we don't think of it anymore as the Malik reading versus the Malik reading. We think of it as, okay, which of the Qurra are you reciting according to, right? And whichever one you recite according to, it's fine. And if you are, capable enough to learn multiple qira'at and to learn all of the qira'at and to be able to recite according to all the different words and awjuh and pronunciations that they have, then that's brilliant. And there's people like that amongst us, right? But then for the mufassir will either be, in the later stage, looking at one qira'ah at a time and explaining that qira'ah. And in the modern time, I guess that's what happens, right? Most mufassirin in the modern times, they might not really be very interested in all the different qira'at. Translators of the Quran in particular are not really very interested in the qira'at. They would just tend to look at the Quran as a finished article according to the one qira'ah or the one reading that has become the dominant one in practice in the world today. And that is the sub-reading of Hafs from Asim, right? Hafs from Asim doesn't have actually any inherent superiority or precedence or priority over other readings. What it does have is just the matter of fact priority, right? The reasons for that could be partly inherent to that reading, maybe certain things which are easier to catch on and to spread. It could be some inherent reasons, but the reasons could also be just political. Who adopted that qira'ah at particular times when empire was spreading, particularly the Ottoman Empire, and adopting a particular qira'ah, and therefore it spreads in a certain way, it gains a certain prestige. Printing presses were invented. What were the qira'at to enjoy the selection by those who were commissioning printed Quran. So all of these factors have their part to play, but the fact is that across the entire world, with small exceptions, the reading of Hafs is the dominant one. And then you still have places where Warsh and Nafi' is widely practiced, or even majority reading, right? In some of the Maghrib, not including Spain now, but in some of the Maghrib, in places like Morocco, Warsh could still be the dominant one. As far as I understand it, it is the dominant one. And then places where Qalun, also from Nafi', is dominant. Libya, for example, comes to mind. And then you've got some of the other readings in some of the other African countries, Ad-Duri. I don't have sort of the specifics to hand right now about where is reciting what, but most of the world is just treats Hafs as if it is the Quran, that is the text of the Quran. So they're sometimes unaware that there is another, there are more ways to recite the Quran. So the first time they hear someone say Maliki Yawmiddin, it can come as quite a surprise. But if you were living in Morocco, the surprising one would be more Maliki Yawmiddin, but perhaps not surprising, because I imagine that they are probably in Morocco more aware of the other qira'at than people say in Britain or America or Pakistan, or I'm just selecting places I might be more familiar with that are just used to the reading of Hafs. Okay, so for the translator, most of the translators just deal with Hafs. Mufassirin would perhaps just deal with Hafs, but not necessarily Hafs, right? It just sort of depends which one is most to hand for them, right? So take Ibn Ashur, rahimahullah, he's a 20th century Mufassir. He died in 1973 in Tunisia, Tunisian Imam. His tafsir is in the first place based upon Qalun, right? It's based upon Qalun from Nafi'. That's what he sort of takes as his default when he's talking about the ayat. But then he also does talk about the other readings. And he must have been well aware that plenty of people who are reading this are going to be more familiar with Hafs. So he makes sure that he mentions the different qira'at. Perhaps in individual mufassirin in different regions have focused on their own sub-reading. But all of them would have started somewhere. But many mufassirin, perhaps most mufassirin, if not all, they would still want to talk about the multiple readings because they're aware that what they're saying about the ayah, if it applies only to their own qira'ah, they haven't quite done the job of explaining everything about the ayah. So they would go beyond the one reading to say, well, there are other readings which are like this, and this is what it would mean according to that reading. Okay. So how the different mufassirin use qira'at, to what extent they're interested in them, their methods and so on is obviously a vast subject that can be looked at in its own right. Ibn Juzayy has explained to us already that he bases his explanation on the reading of Nafi'. So there's some sort of alternation between whether he's referring to Warsh or Qalun. But anyway, it's based broadly upon the reading of Nafi'. And then he mentions other qira'at where he feels that it's interesting enough to do so. But the fact is that when we look at the explanations coming from the Salaf, sometimes a narrated opinion, it's not automatically known to us whether that opinion that they were saying was related to this qira'ah or to that qira'ah. So that's the tricky thing sometimes. You have a narration which is attached to this word in the ayah, but it might not be clear immediately that the person who was explaining the word was actually explaining that reading of the word, right? So an example that comes to my mind, I noticed this when I was, somebody asked me about an ayah from Surah Al-Kahf, and they'd read something about it, Tafsir of Ibn Kathir. And if I recall the mas'ala correctly, because in the ayah it says, وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَرٌ فَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُ. So he had thamar. Okay, so this is the people who have, one of them has 2 gardens, and the other one doesn't have, and then they start to argue, and the one with the 2 gardens is all proud and boastful and arrogant and thinks that he will have everything, even in the next life, if there is a next life. That's the way he says. So, وَكَانَ لَهُ ثَمَرٌ فَقَالَ لِصَاحِبِهِ وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ أَنَا أَكْثَرُ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَأَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. So, the point is the word thamar. In the tafsir, one of the explanations of thamar is wealth. Okay, and the translation sort of just says thamar could mean wealth. Now, I don't know if that is, that may perhaps has some validity if I looked into it more, but from what I gathered, when I looked also at the Arabic of Tafsir ibn Kathir, and then I looked at some other sources, it became clearer to me that the word thamar means what it appears to mean, which is fruit. But the other reading of this ayah has وَكَانَ لَهُ ثُمُرٌ and also thumrun, right? So the other qira'ah has the word thumr or thumur, right? Which is just 2 pronunciations of the same word. So those are dialectical or a dialectal variation. Whereas thamar is a different word. Thamar is fruit, and thumur or thumr is wealth, is money. So according to one of the readings, he had wealth. وَكَانَ لَهُ ثُمُرٌ. So in that case, it is not that thamar means wealth. What's happened here is a sort of transposing one way of saying the word, or one qira'ah of the ayah, with an explanation that belonged to the other qira'ah. Okay, I'm saying this example a little bit off the cuff. I'll need to check it and verify it as well. But there will be examples of this that happen because we are not attaching the right explanation to the right qira'ah. So ikhtilaf al-qira'at is about establishing what text, what version of the text are we actually dealing with here, one at a time. Okay, so being clear about which reading we're taking, and therefore what meaning is going to be imparted by the ayah. Okay, and what meaning are we going to attribute to the ayah? So this has fiqh implications as well, of course, right? We encountered, when we were reading Surah Al-Baqarah, we encountered حتى يطهرنا and حتى يطهرنا, right? So what does that tell us about the ruling of when it is okay to resume various things after menses? Okay, يطهرنا gives you one type of conclusion about that, right? So it's just the end of bleeding. Okay, يطهرنا has a stronger form, right? So it indicates that actually more is required until they have cleansed themselves, so physically bathed with water. So there's a different implication. Which one is the ayah saying? Well, it depends which qira'ah we are looking at. And we can also have another investigation, say how do we reconcile between these qira'at? But that's the second point. The first point is, according to this one, what is the denotation and the meaning that is given by the ayah? So ikhtilaf al-qira'at can result in ikhtilaf al-tafsir, right? This is the point that we're trying to draw attention to. So then once we have differing of the readings, okay. First is the differing of the readings. You can see that there is, this is not very English. First is the differing of the readings. So the first is variation between readings. And we'd probably have to be a little bit clear about what we mean by readings here, because readings is a very broad word. We want to make sure we understand. We're talking about the qira'at, which is a technical thing, not just like, oh, I'm reading it this way, you're reading it that way. It's just how, as readers, we come to it with different readings. Okay, that's a very broad idea. Here we're talking about a specific technical matter. Second, the different ways of inflection of the case endings of words. Okay, that's a description of I'rab, even when the readings agree. So even if we are dealing with the same text, so there's no difference in any voweling here, there could still be multiple ways that we can actually understand how this is worded, right? To understand how this is worded. So we're dealing with the same text, but there are different ways of reading that. Reading here in the sense of interpreting that grammatically, syntactically, right? So wujuh al-i'rab. So this happens, of course, a great deal. And I won't get into examples here. I gave more examples of the qira'at point because I think it's a point that people maybe find harder to understand. Even when the readings agree. Okay, so you're asking me, does he say when there is, or when we just consider one reading? Qira'ah is singular. Yeah, so this transition is not too good here. What he means here is, even if they are agreed upon the reading, right? If they, the mufassirin, are agreed upon which reading they're talking about, there can still be difference in how they do i'rab, how they grammatically interpret and syntactically interpret the reading itself. So I'm going to word it like this, and again, don't take it that in the midst of the session that if I write something, that's my final wording on it, but I'll put something that can pass, right? A passing grade at least, and not a failing grade. As for what was there before I changed it, definitely borderline, but just below failing. Third, اختلاف اللغويين في معنى الكلمة. So then you've got a word itself, right? The denotation of a word. What is the meaning? So the linguists here, لغويين, the fancier word for لغويين in this sense is actually lexicologists, right? So lexicologists can be someone who actually compiles a dictionary, or it can just be someone who is involved in lexicology as a field. So lexicology is telling us this word, this is what it means. Another one says, no, it means that. Some will tell you it can mean this, it can mean that. And then as the process goes on, the lexicologist will be telling you about the range of things that have been said about the meaning of the word. But going back, you would find that some are telling you, no, it definitely means this. Some are saying it definitely means that. Okay, because that's what's familiar perhaps to particular tribes. So this can be a matter of dialect, different dialects among the Arabs. So اختلاف اللغويين في معنى الكلمة, it would result in the mufassir taking it in different ways, right? Different possibilities of what is meant by a single word, right? So we're talking about on the level of the word, or we're talking about on the level of the construction, right? The grammatical construction. اشتراك اللفظ بين معنيين فأكثر. So that's where, so this is what we'd call, this is a homonym, right? A word sharing two or more meanings. So you've got the same word in terms of form, but then in terms of meaning, it has you know, multiple meanings. Let's see. A word sharing two or more meanings. So it kind of follows from the previous point, but it's a slightly different thing. You can either look at it as there's a single word which has two or more meanings, or there are two or more words that just happen to look exactly the same because their letters are the same. That's why we call it homonym. I'm just going to write that there sort of floaty way and decide whether I'm going to stick it into the text or not. But that's the phenomenon, right? So when we call it a homonym in English, in linguistics terms, homonym would indicate that actually there are different words, but they just happen to look exactly the same. They've got the same letters in the same order, right? But they're different words because they have different meanings. Or you can look at it as the same word has different meanings. Okay, that's called ishtirak. And actually ishtirak is quite like what we're calling homonym, right? اشتراك اللفظ بين معنيين فأكثر. What this indicates is you've got multiple meanings which are sharing a word form. That's kind of how I understand the way the word ishtirak works in Arabic linguistics. Okay, number 5. احتمال العموم أو الخصوص. So here, in any term that's being used, any expression that's being used, is this intended as all-encompassing, as universal, or is it referring to a smaller set? Okay, so some will take it this way, some will take it that way. They will base that on certain pieces of evidence, circumstantial evidence, contextual understanding, right? So general or particular. General is used for umum, that's fine. I tend to use universal as a technical word for umum, right? Because once you contrast it with particular, I think universal and particular are a good pair of opposites. General and specific are a good pair. 6th, the possibility of it having an absolute meaning or restricted meaning. So absolute here, itlaq, means, you know, without any restricting clause, without any qaid, right? So if it has a qaid, then it's muqayyad. Okay, so it's either in a state of itlaq or it's a state of taqyid, right? So a famous example of that in a certain kafara, you have, you know, what tahriru raqaba, to free, literally a neck, but it means to free a slave, right? Does that slave have to be a believing slave? Does it have to be a Muslim that the person is freeing in order to expiate for their sin or crime? Well, in some ayat you have the mention of raqabatin mu'minah. You have the taqeed. In others, you have got just raqaba. So do you take that as similarly, you just take it as it comes? So any raqaba, freeing any slave, would then fulfill the condition, or you understand it in terms of the taqeed in the other ayah. So that's what they call hamlul mutlaqi ala muqayyad, interpreting the unrestricted phrase in terms of the restricted one elsewhere. So as if to say, from the other ayah, I understand that the type of raqaba that needs to be freed in order for expiation to occur has to be raqabatin mu'minah. So it's not a difference of, is there so raqabatin mu'minah, everyone will agree this is muqayyad because it's there, it's expressed. But the question is, when we encounter a place where there is no qaid, but should we understand the qaid here based on it occurring elsewhere? Right? So this is where difference of opinion occurs between the mufassirin and likewise, of course, between the fuqaha. And the fuqaha will base it not only on the ayah, but on other factors and circumstances, which will lead them then to bring that understanding onto the ayah, right? So let's not kid ourselves and think that tafsir is a completely abstract approach where, you know, they understand the ayah on its own terms and then they start looking at other evidences. No, these things will be happening in tandem, and that will affect how the ayah is going to be understood, because each juristic school will also want to say, when we give this opinion, which we got from such and such source, and maybe some of the Sahaba have told us, taught us this way, and then their accusers will say, hold on a second, you're going against the Quran, or you're going against the Hadith. Then they will have to say, no, we're not going against the Quran for such and such reasons. No, we're not going against the Hadith for such and such reasons. With the Hadith, they could even say, yes, we're going against that Hadith because we're basing it on something stronger, another Hadith, or we're basing it on the Quran. But they cannot say, yes, we're going against the Quran because such and such reason. At most, they could say, this ayah we consider to be abrogated, right? So just to give you an insight a little bit into how these things connect, tafsir is not done, abstractly and remotely from other considerations. When we are especially dealing with ayat al-ahkam, all the things in usul al-fiqh are brought to bear. The difference between umum and khusus and itlaq and taqeed. Okay, if we wanted to just, to clarify that, we would go to chapter 4 in my thesis. Okay, so I was going to maybe, let me see if I can get the page number like this, and we can have a quick look together just to pick up some examples from there. Otherwise, we could, of course, go to Sheikh Tayyar's book. I'm sure he's got lots of examples as well. But my thesis has got a section in it which is called Juristic Methods in Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, right? So yeah, I'll pull that up for a brief look. Okay. Remember page 36 because I want to come back to that. So in general, we've got ijmal in the Quran, we've got bayan of the ijmal in the Quran. I talk about that first and then talk about takhsis of the am. So an am expression is one which denotes all items to which the wording extends comprehensively with no limitation in terms of amount or quantity. The khas is the opposite of that. But let's focus on the definition of am, and we'll see that takhsis, particularization, is removing universality from the am, clarifying that it denotes only some of those items to which the wording extends. So I'm so tempted to say something about Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, but it's just going to go wrong if I try to use this example. But there are a host of Arabic expressions which are taken to denote universality, such as when you've got just a word and then you might have al with it, which makes it sound like it covers all that are within that word. Okay. Let's see. I'm not big on examples, as you can see. Right. Example of takhsis is in the ayah, وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوءٍ. مُطَلَّقَات. Al-mutallaqat. So by looking at the word itself, you don't get from the word itself, that it just means some mutallaqat. It means all mutallaqat, all women who are issued with divorce, right? From that word, especially with the al, especially with the plural, everything's going for it to be an am expression. So on the face of it, it is am. So all divorced women have to wait for 3 periods, right? 3 monthly periods, however we define quru here, before remarrying. So it encompasses all women. However, there are other verses which demonstrate that this ruling does not apply equally to all divorcees. First, it excludes cases of divorce prior to consummation. Okay, because in ayat in Surah Al-Ahzab, right, before consummation, there is no waiting period. Pregnant women, their iddah is to give birth. whether that giving birth happens in a shorter time, less than 3 months, or whether it's going to take, close to 9 months until she actually gives birth, that is her iddah, right? So there are those which are excluded. So there is takhsis. There's takhsis through the other ayat. And then from that, you then understand that the original word al-mutallaqat, which looks like it is am, in form, it is, in essence, in origin, it is am, but in reality, that's not what's intended by the word wal-mutallaqat in the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah. Okay, so then there's examples here which you can look into a bit more. When you've got taqyid or mutlaq al-muqayyad, there is some similarity. So there's a good reason for you to ask for clarification. The mutlaq is in fact a subcategory of the khas. It denotes an essential meaning without any qualification, qaid, to restrict its extension. Right, so shahrain. So when the period of fasting is defined as shahrain, this is also in the kafara, that is just, it could be just you have to fast for 2 months. So then it's specific, it's khas, but it's not muqayyad. Qualification would be shahraini mutatabi'ain. Shahraini mutatabi'ain. So continuous. So to fast 2 months continuously, like 60 days on the trot, that would be shahrain mutatabi'ain. If you take away the word mutatabi'ain, then shahrain could be like you fast 1 month and then you fast another month later, right? And maybe, I'm not so sure, maybe 60 days could be spread out over a whole year. But certainly shahrain would imply 1 month and another month following that, but not necessarily straight away. Once you have mutatabi'ain, now you have a qaid. It's a restricting clause, which means that you can't just take it as as any shahrain, right? I'm thinking also about the baqarah, right? When they were told to slaughter a baqarah, and then they came and they asked for all these quyud, right? They were given the permission first. Anything, idbahu baqarah. If they'd gone and chosen any baqarah, it would have sufficed them because they'd have followed the command. But they said, what kind of baqarah? Tell us more, tell us more, tell us more, until it became, there's so many quyud. And quyud also means, by the way, like, chains and shackles. So they shackled themselves through these quyud. And then it was very difficult. وَمَا كَادُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. They were barely able to find a baqarah which would fulfill all the quyud that they had brought upon themselves by asking over and over again. So the qualified expression is taken as tafsir of bayan of the unqualified one. This is the process of haml al-mutlaq al al-muqayyad that I have pointed to. Okay, so that's where we saw the example. Okay, so dam. So what kind of blood is prohibited to eat? Damun masfuh. Okay, masfuh is clarified. This qaid exists in Surah Al-An'am. In other places, it's just dam. It's just mentioned as, Allah Azza wa Jalla has forbidden dam. But of course, in reality, we know that blood that remains within the meat. Okay, sorry, and if you're vegetarians, plug your ears now. So the blood that remains within the meat is not forbidden, right? But it's the blood that flows off, right? So that qaid is found in one particular ayah. In the other ayat, it is to be understood, although the qaid is not there. Okay. So yeah, further examples are here. Tahrir al-Raqaba I gave is one of the famous examples as well. In the kafara of dhihar, it is not stated, right? There's no qaid, is not stated. Whereas in unintentional killing, it is specified as raqaba mu'mina. Okay, so we'll come back to our process here. So ihtimal al-itlaq aw al-taqyid. Is this expression to be understood as qualified, or is it to be taken as unrestricted? And we can use the word general here, but we don't want to get mixed up between am and mutlaq. Seventh, the possibility of it having a literal or metaphoric meaning. So the same word could be understood in its literal sense, or could be understood in its metaphorical sense. I mean, of course, a great deal can be said about this as well. but we won't do it. Okay, but you know, you get the point, inshallah, right? Right? Do you get the point? Right? This is a literal point. Do you get the point, or you get the point? You get it more now, I think. الثامن احتمال الإضمار أو الاستقلال. If we're not looking at the screen, you did not understand what just happened there. احتمال الإضمار أو الاستقلال. Right, so the possibility of there being an elision, words understood which are not said, or an independent meaning that does not need one to assume an elision. Okay, that seems fine in terms of how they translated it as well, but I want to have a look at Tayyar as well to see whether he understands that in any different way from how they did. So idmar could refer to a couple of different things. That's the issue. Idmar can refer to pronouns. Okay, that's why we call them damirs, right? Or it could refer to something which is just left unstated, unmentioned. So it's like saying hadf, which is elision. So they've taken it as referring to elision, which does seem to be fine. So either we are going to have to assume there's some words here, unstated words that we need in order to understand the expression, or we're going to take the words as if nothing is missing from this, but we're taking it as it is, as a not independent statement, but a statement that works as it is, as a standalone thing, without the need for any idmar, any assumption that there are words that are needed in order to complete the thought. Okay, because leaving out certain words in the expression is perfectly normal, probably in all languages, but certainly in the Arabic language, there can be things that are left unstated because the reader or the listener is supposed to fill in those gaps with their own mind. It's very straightforward. Okay. Ninth, احتمال كون الكلمة زائدة أو غير زائدة. Okay, what do I do with a certain ma or a certain kaf or a certain, min? Am I taking it as something that has to have an impact on the meaning? In which case I have to deal with that meaning. Or am I just going to say, no, this particular harf has appeared here, maybe just to strengthen the meaning. So we don't have to say then za'ida means that it has no purpose whatsoever. It might just strengthen the meaning, it might just emphasize, but it doesn't have a grammatical import. This is what's really intended when they say something is za'ida, which is a word that not all of the commentators on the Quran or the scholars of the Quran sometimes disagreed about whether it's appropriate to describe something as za'ida. Grammarians, for the most part, are okay with saying za'ida, but they have other words. So sometimes they say, we shouldn't say anything in the Quran as za'ida because it sounds like it's superfluous. Like you could just take it out and nobody would notice. No, it's there as part of the Quran. So calling it za'ida might be khilaful adab. We should perhaps use other words like fasl. There's other words that maybe imad they used as well for things that are just included, not in order to import a meaning directly, right? In English, calling it extra, might be problematic. I use the word otios. Otios is just like a fancy word for extra in reality, but because it's sort of exotic enough sounding, people don't notice. So it's just a technical consideration by mufassirin and by grammarians that if a certain word isn't being taken to have a direct impact on meaning, then it is za'ida. But then beyond that, you can, from a balagha perspective, you can still say, well, it's there, it adds something, but not on the level of tafsir, right? العاشر احتمال حمل الكلام على الترتيب. So either, okay, there being an extra word is here, right? Okay, the possibility of there being an extra word is not a very good way of translating this phrase, because he says احتمال كون الكلمة زائدة أو غير زائدة. So disagreement over whether a word is to be considered extra / OTOs or not. So not the possibility of there being an extra word, that sounds very strange. It will lead people's minds in different directions, right? You've got to think about people's minds out there. Mention in the text such as that or what. Of course, he's giving here, or she's giving here, English examples, right? So is it very useful to give English examples right here? You know, like you could give English examples, just say, just like in English, we might have the word that or what, which is meaning is not needed. Even then, why would the word that or what be extra? It's not really clear to me how that example works, right? So that whole bit of translation needs to be sorted out. 10th, احتمال حمل الكلام على الترتيب. So the possibility of making the speech accord with the sequential arrangement. You're not making it accord. Or with advancing a word in the sequential arrangement or putting it later in the sequential arrangement. So awkward, this translation, right? All that he's saying is, Haml here is interpreting in terms of, right? Haml al-kalam ala tartib. Either I take the order as is, or I assume that there has been a switcheroo. Switcheroo is not a technical term. It is a Sohaib term, right? So there's been a switcheroo. There has been the word order is supposed to be understood in reverse. Okay, so this is where examples would be so useful, huh? احتمال حمل الكلام على الترتيب. Okay, so I think we're going to need a good example of this. So we're going to have to skip down a little bit in Sheikh Tayyar's book because we have not been here. Here is talking, this is still in the last chapter, he's talking about tafsir and ta'wil. Pardon me if you don't like flashing images, you'll have to just look away for a moment while we skim through. He talks about hadith, talks about التصوف. Okay, so this is still just at the end of the last chapter. There's usul al-fiqh, yeah. Al-lugha. Okay, so there's a few things just at the end of the last chapter in terms of the ulum. Okay, so then he's got this thing, this list that we're looking at. Okay. I'm sure there's loads of great examples. This is worth reading through and so on, but I just didn't want to get bogged down in a very, very detailed dars. Okay, I said I was going to see what he said about it. Okay. Okay, so it's as we said, really. Okay, and then احتمال الكلمة الزائدة. I mean, the way this is worded here is similar to how they translated it there. The possibility of there being an extra word. So if that's the way that some copies of Ibn Juzayy worded it, then that would explain why they translated it as they did. So then he comes to okay. فأردت أن أعيبها. So some of the scholars said, okay, this is regarding. Okay, let's maybe take a clear example on that one. وقال رجل مؤمن من آل فرعون يكتم إيمانه. Right, so either من آل فرعون is a description of the mu'min, okay? Or من آل فرعون is supposed to connect with the words يكتم إيمانه. This doesn't look to me exactly like taqdim wa ta'khir because you can still keep the word order and just consider that. وقال رجل مؤمن من آل فرعون يكتم إيمانه, which is clearly not the apparent sense of the ayah. Let's see if there's any clearer example than that. والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى. فجعله غثاء هذه الحالة بعد الخضرة وأحوى يعني مائلا إلى السواد. Yeah. So he's mentioned that some of the Mufassirin sometimes saw it that actually this word has been sort of placed somewhere other than its obvious place, right? It's sort of been brought forward from where you'd expect it to be, or pushed a good way back from where it's expected to be. But we have to understand the word as if it was in this position. That's al-qawl bil-taqdeem wa-ta'khir, right? That's saying that you have to sort of resequence the words in your mind in order to understand the ayah correctly. Whereas al-haml ala al-tartib is to say, no, I mean, I'm just going to take it as the words have appeared in order, right? That's the basic point. So not making the speech accord with, but interpreting in terms of, that's al-haml al-kalam ala al-tartib. Taking it as being in sequence, or taking it as involving taqdeem wa ta'khir. So you don't have to say or with advancing or putting it later. Taqdeem wa ta'khir, these go hand in hand, right? So if I do taqdeem of something, I've done ta'khir of the other thing, right? So taqdeem wa ta'khir is actually one expression, which I call switcheroo, right? Or you can call it something else. But taqdeem wa ta'khir should not be treated as if it was two different things. Like they've said, أو على التقديم أو على التأخير. Right? Then احتمال أن يكون الحكم منسوخا أو محكما. So that's where we said before, something is abrogated, or, see, they shouldn't use the word unequivocal here. محكما is being used in contrast with the word mansukhan. So abrogated or not. You can simply say that, abrogated or not abrogated. Or you use a term that means the opposite of abrogated, such as abrogated or remains in operation, something like this. So the hukm, as we usually make it, is the ruling. So it's not so much the ayah is abrogated, but the ruling denoted by the ayah is abrogated. In reality, naskh pertains not to the ayah, but naskh pertains to the hukm. In the nature of what naskh is, it pertains to the hukm, not to the ayah itself. Unless we're talking about naskh tilawa, which is a separate thing. That is to say, there were some ayat that were revealed, and then they were no longer to remain in the Quran, and their tilawa was abrogated. Right? So if that's the case, then they are no longer in the Quran, and the Mufassirin are not dealing with them as Quran. So we don't have a disagreement on whether they're abrogated or not. They're just not between the two covers of the Quran. So they're not part of our, concern as Mufassirin per se, right? But the difference pertains to whether in the Quran this ayah is mansukha or not. But what we really mean is whether the hukm of this ayah is mansukh or not. So it's important to keep that conceptual difference very clear in your mind. The ayah is still there, the ayah is still Quran, and it may still have value, at the very least, the value of reciting it and getting the reward of reciting it, at the very least. Its meaning, just even the fact that the hukm is mansukh in it, still tells us something about the Quran and the sequence of ayat and the sequence of how the Quran came to bring guidance and lighten things upon people. So there are many benefits from reciting the ayat which are mansukha, but all we mean is the ruling or a particular ruling in it is abrogated. But other rulings may still exist in the ayah that are not mansukha, right? So they can be partial naskh of an ayah. Right, الثاني عشر اختلاف الرواية في التفسير عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وعن السلف. So that's where we're talking about the hadith. We mentioned that the hadith, whether we're talking about hadith marfu' from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم or from early authorities in general, whether we consider that to be strong narration or not. Okay, so it's assessed in terms of strength, and then in terms of relevance and in terms of impact, right? We spoke about that before. So strength is the first thing. Some may take this hadith as authentic or as hasan, at least sahih or hasan, so they use it. Others may say, no, this hadith is too weak for us to consider. We're going to put that aside and carry on based on other evidences, right? So then based on that, he leads to the wujuh al-tarjih, right? What was the page that I had to remember? I'm a step ahead of you guys. It was 36. Yeah, I'm going to come back to that, but it was just because the first thing he mentions is, a little bit important to me, which is Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran.
وأما وجوه الترجيح فهي 12. الأول تفسير بعض القرآن ببعض، فإذا دل موضع من القرآن على المراد بموضع آخر حملناه عليه ورجحنا القول بذلك على غيره من الأقوال. الثاني حديث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، فإذا ورد عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم تفسير شيء من القرآن عولنا عليه، لا سيما إن ورد في الحديث الصحيح. الثالث أن يكون القول قول الجمهور وأكثر المفسرين، فإن كثرة القائلين بالقول تقتضي ترجيحه. الرابع أن يكون القول قول من يقتدى به من الصحابة كالخلفاء الأربعة وعبد الله بن عباس، لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: اللهم فقهه في الدين وعلمه التأويل. الخامس أن يدل على صحة القول كلام العرب من اللغة أو الإعراب أو التصريف أو الاشتقاق. السادس أن يشهد لصحة القول سياق الكلام ويدل عليه ما قبله أو ما بعده.
Okay, so this is all really great stuff, very strong, very concise, summarized, important considerations in tafsir, right? So in some way, you can see this as also, okay, this is, as I said, the toolkit of the mufassir, right? So with Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi, who was around the same time as Ibn Juzayy, he has mentioned that the strongest, the most correct form of tafsir is to do tafsir of the Quran through the Quran, because things may be summarized in one place and expanded in another, etc. And then he says, and if you're not able to do that, then with the Sunnah, and if you're not able to do that, then aqwal al-Sahaba, right? So this, I talk about that a lot in my thesis from various angles and raise various issues about it. But what's interesting here is, although he says wujuh al-tarjih, and he said al-awwal, al-thani, al-thalith, one would still have to investigate more clearly whether this order is something very important to him, right? So naturally, the Quran being mentioned first makes sense, and the Sunnah, the Hadith of Prophet being mentioned second also makes sense. And then after that, it's going to be a bit harder to insist that definitely he means the Thalith before the Rabi', and the Rabi' before the Khamis, and the Khamis before the Sadis, etc. Maybe he did, like the argument could be made, but I think the opposite argument could also be made, i.e. that he's listing things in no particular order, but there is definitely a sense that, of course, you're not going to stick Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran down, near the bottom of the list. Right, so I had talked about that here in my thesis because I mind the the works of Usul al-Tafsir or al-Quran for references to Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, and then in the introductions to various tafsirs I looked as well. One of the earliest is found in the Tafsir of Muqatil. Okay, he just mentions that there are different bits of content in the Quran, and in a way you can understand that as telling you that you have to do tafsir of the Quran through the Quran, although he's not saying that explicitly, right? And then as well as I've already talked earlier in the thesis about Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Kathir. Okay, and then a comparable passage is found in Ibn Juzayy to explain parts of the Quran with reference to others. Hence, if one juncture indicates the intended meaning at another, we interpret it, I'm comparing mine with theirs, we interpret it accordingly, and take the corresponding opinion as preponderant over others. So you notice that we both happen to use the word accordingly, but I don't see hamluhu ala kadha as meaning make it accord with it. Right? It's rather we interpret it accordingly, interpret it in that light, and take the corresponding opinion as preponderant. So saying preponderant is a bit more technical way of talking about tarjih rather than make it weightier. Tarjih as weight is kind of nice in its own right, because it's like a balance of scale, scales which are weighing up the two sides, and then this tarjih of one what did they say, kaf over the other. So that is something that you do get from the word tarjih. However, the author does not state that there's any sense of priority in how this is ordered, right? He uses the word al-awwal al-thani, but he doesn't state that this is in order. And then various items within the list, I also say, are within Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, right? So such as the context, preceding and following text, co-text. And the usul al-fiqh categories, umum and itlaq and so on, also are related to Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, which is why I've talked about them in the thesis as I showed you earlier today, right? So that's all. Okay, so the statement is a statement of the majority or most of the commentators. Did I talk about the hadith part? Not really. If there's anything from him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the commentary, we'll rely upon it. That's fine. Statement is a statement of majority or most. So that's kind of looks a bit redundant in English. Let's see. قول الجمهور وأكثر المفسرين. So it's not really. There's not going to be much benefit in trying to replicate al-jumhur وأكثر المفسرين. For a great number of people, فإن كثرة القائلين بالقول تقتضي ترجيحه. Right? I mean, so here he didn't use the word rijal, so I don't know why we would insert our own gendered language into the equation, right? So why not just say people of knowledge? You know, because there's no i'tibar here on men or women here. So for a great number of people making the same statement, requires that we consider the weightiest. Remember, taqtadi is not requires. And they haven't used the word preponderance, but I'm going to start using it. I'll keep it in yellow in case I find a way to make it back to the weighty business. Okay. تقتضي ترجيحه. It doesn't require. It does not require. So that would be that's a problematic word to stick in here, because it could be that the majority see something, and then the minority are still entitled to have a minority view, and we're entitled to go with the minority if we see it as a stronger view. That's fine. But it just, the fact of many people saying it gives it some weight. That's all he's saying. تقتضي ترجيحه. If that was enough, then you wouldn't have to say all the others. Just say always go with the majority, and then you're going to be right. No, it's not going to work like that.
السابع أن يكون ذلك المعنى هو المتبادر إلى الذهن.
Okay, so actually he's already read ahead, so I'm reading here. Fourth of the statement is from some of the companions who are emulated. So here he means those who are leaders in tafsir. من يقتدى به, yeah, someone who's a qudwa in this sha'n, right? كالخلفاء الأربعة وعبد الله بن عباس. Okay, so all of the companions, they can maybe emulated in various ways, but in the relevant sense, some more than others. And then Ibn Abbas is singled out here for the reason of this hadith and dua of the Prophet ﷺ. Fifth, that the speech of the Arabs should indicate the soundness of the statement. The statement, i.e. the opinion that you're assessing, whether through idiom, inflection. Why idiom? Inflection, declension, or etymological derivation. So it should be supported by language, right? Whether we mean the lexicon itself. So I don't know exactly why they've gone with idiom here. أو الإعراب أو التصريف. So إعراب is your grammatical case endings. تصريف is the form of the words. So he's already talked about that. So inflection, declension of word forms. Okay, so tasrif could overlap with the word declension, but I'm not sure that's going to work, because declension still is within grammar and the Arab more so than it is tasrif. Yeah, it overlaps for sure, but I think that we'll look at the word that was used earlier, and then we'll try and keep some consistency with that. أو الاشتقاق, or etymological derivation. So ishtiqaq could refer to two different things here. Ishtiqaq could be like the origins of that word, even from outside the Arabic language, or it means ishtiqaq, how words are derived within the language. So then etymology is not really the issue. Ishtiqaq is how the flexibility within the word. So that's closer to what they're calling declension. Okay, ishtiqaq. So that needs a bit of thought about how to word this. Okay, so sixth, that the context should support that view. Should be a witness for the authenticity of the statement. Not so much authenticity, but the correctness. Okay, because it's like they say, you know, if you're making if you're making attribution, then you have to be concerned with authenticity, and if you're making a claim, then you have to bring your proof of it, right? What did they say? Someone who can figure out what's the Arabic behind what I'm saying here. In kana al-mudda'a, I can't remember now how they say this, right? فالصحة, and then they say فالبرهان, right? فالحجة. Somebody will remind me. I'll read it in a minute. Okay, so in any case, what we're dealing with here is this a correct statement or not? Not is it an authentic statement? Authentic sounds like you're talking about إن ناقلا فالصحة أو مدعيا فالدليل. That's what we're looking for, right? So if you're telling me that you're transmitting this statement, then it's a matter of establishing the authenticity of it. إن كنت ناقلا أو إن ناقلا فالصحة أو مدعيا. If you're claiming something, then what you need is the dalil for that. Okay. Okay, so the correctness of that what is before it and after it should indicate it. ويدل عليه ما قبله أو ما بعده. So there's a slight difference between just saying siyaq and then saying ما قبله وبعده. So yeah, those could be almost, you could be saying the same thing here. But siyaq is a slightly broader concept. There's different types of siyaq. Okay, namely the purpose of saying something is, the broader purpose that you're getting at is also within something called siyaq. All right, I'm going to take you to my thesis, and I've got a diagram here which might be nice to look at. So types of siyaq I talk about here: siyaq nassi, siyaq lughawi, which is the same thing, or siyaq, which is the gharad or the intent of the speaker, situational, and then this is what I call the context family in tafsir, right? So siyaq can be broader as well in terms of even the revelatory context is a kind of siyaq, right? But that's not what he's not going to be referring to that kind here. He means overall, why is this being said? What's being said, right? And then what can you pick up from what's before it? Does this opinion accord with what's being said just before? Does it accord with what's being said just after? Then it falls within the siyaq in terms of the flow of the word and the flows of the ideas. Okay. Yeah, we can ponder more on this. Diagram another time, inshallah. Now, we already started hearing that the meaning should be immediately perceptible to the intellect. Because that is an indication of its being obvious in the weightier view.
فإن ذلك دليل على ظهوره ورجحانه.
So the should be here, I'm not sure the translation is definitely wrong, but what you are picking up from this translation, al-mutabadir ila dhihni, funnily enough, is that they're giving that as a prescriptive thing. The meaning should be immediately perceptible. What he's saying is that if you are dealing with two different possible meanings, and one of them is just far more obvious, then that is a dalil of it being the better view, right? And it should be given more weight, right? Than something which is obscure, something which requires a lot of mental effort to get to. Right? Again, that's not the absolute rule. It's just that between two things, all of the factors considered, something being clear is one of its the factors which will make you choose that opinion in tafsir.
الثامن تقديم الحقيقة على المجاز، فإن الحقيقة أولى أن يحمل عليها اللفظ عند الأصوليين، وقد يترجح المجاز إذا كثر استعماله حتى يصير أغلب استعمالا من الحقيقة، ويسمى مجازا راجحا، والحقيقة مرجوحة، وقد اختلف العلماء أيهما يقدم.
Right, so before we get to this usul al-fiqh issue, تقديم الحقيقة على المجاز. So when you have a word which can be taken as haqiqa or can be taken as majaz, the preference is given. The default state is that you try to see it as haqiqa, unless there is something that pushes you that you have to consider it as majaz. أولى أن يحمل عليها اللفظ عند الأصوليين, because literal is more worthy of making the exterior form of the words accord with it. It's just unnecessarily wordy here, I think. Al-lafdhu is just the wording, so you don't have to, I think, emphasize here the exterior form of the words. I don't know if there's a need to make the word laf as complicated as that here. And al-usuliyin, okay, so he does mean by usuliyin here the scholars of usul al-fiqh, right? Because this issue of haqiqa and majaz has, very tangible effects on legal discussions. So that's why they're being brought in here, in terms of what the usuliyin have to say on the matter, right? Whether his statement works as well in other genres or subgenres in the Quran, as I call them sometimes, whether this haqiqa is awla min al-majaz applies to every situation and context, well, that's an open question. But let's say at the very least, when it comes to discussions which have a legal character, then taking things on haqiqa is to be preferred, right? Whether you extend that from the existing discussion of usul al-fiqh to other things, we're going to leave that as an open question for now. But of course, what Ibn Juzayy is saying, is just like, yeah, haqiqa is better, is the default, and then he's illustrating it with the fiqhi issues. وقد يترجح المجاز إذا كثر استعماله حتى يصير أغلب استعمالا من الحقيقة. In some cases, there is something which is the original literal meaning of the word, and then the metaphorical meaning is used, the figurative meaning is used so frequently that actually it is the mutabadir, right? It's actually the thing that comes to your mind first, rather than that old literal sense that has been sort of forgotten in the midst of time. ويسمى مجازا راجحا. It's called a مجاز راجح. والحقيقة مرجوحة. Okay. وقد اختلف العلماء أيها يقدم. Okay. Metaphor. So sometimes, so he's not actually saying, however, the metaphorical is considered to have more weight. He's talking about a scenario, and then he's talking about what the different position of the schools is concerning them, right? So it could be that the majaz is given tarjih. Let's have a look. I'll read through the whole discussion before I comment further on that. Question, is statement for qawl in this context clear? Is interpretation perhaps more precise? Yes, interpretation would be better than statement generally in this whole passage. Right. فمذهب أبي حنيفة.
فمذهب أبي حنيفة تقديم الحقيقة لأنها الأصل، ومذهب أبي يوسف تقديم المجاز الراجح لرجحانه، وقد يكون المجاز أفصح وأبرع فيكون أرجح.
Okay. The metaphor is considered to have more weight if its usage is so frequent that it is more often used than the literal, and then it is called the outweighing metaphor. All right, so they've used the same kind of haqiqa, I guess, of rujhan, and the literal is considered to be outweighed. Scholars differ as to which of the two has precedence. Position of Abu Hanifa was to give preference. You see, you're going to precedence and then preference. You should keep those as the same. And the position of Abu Yusuf was to give precedence. Again, he's gone preference, precedence, preference, precedence, right? To the outweighing metaphor because of its weightiness. Sometimes the metaphor is more eloquent, more excellent, so that is weightier. Right, this whole thing, I want to have a look at the commentary. I'll have a look at Sheikh Tayyar's commentary and see it will help to clarify some issues here, because it is not immediately clear to me what is being argued.
التاسع تقديم العموم على الخصوص فإن العموم أولى لأنه الأصل إلا أن يدل دليل على التخصيص.
Okay, so if there is a way of understanding it as am, then that is given precedence. Okay, but if there's evidence for takhsis, then that evidence is taken into consideration. Okay, to give precedence to the general over the particular. And I've used other terms here. So it's for the universal meaning, right? It's not taqdeem of the am verse over the khas verse. The point is, if one opinion is taking it as am, the other one is taking it as khas, we'll go with the one that says it's am, unless the one who's saying it's khas has a good reason for saying it's khas, in which case we'll go with that. So it's just that our starting point is to consider the umum before we jump to the idea of takhsis or khusus, right? The general is more fitting because it is the default, unless there's an indication that it's a particular meaning, right? So I just want to make sure that we get across the idea that he's actually getting at here in terms of tarjih of aqwal. 10th, to give precedence to the absolute over the limited.
العاشر تقديم الإطلاق على التقييد إلا أن يدل دليل على التقييد. 11 تقديم الاستقلال على الإضمار إلا أن يدل دليل على الإضمار. 12 حمل الكلام على ترتيبه إلا أن يدل دليل على التقديم والتأخير.
Okay, so in all of this, he's just basically saying of these categories, there is something which is the default state, and we would go with that unless there's a convincing reason to go with the other, right? So you don't just jump to think, oh, this actually, these ayahs are, the words here are not in the order that they appear to be. We should understand it in this way. Well, why, right? If you can read it as sequential, read it as sequential. Just do that. Why would you make things more complicated? Why would you posit the existence of mudmar words, elision, implied words, implied phrases, particles? Why would you posit that when there's no need to, when you can read it in a much simpler way without positing that? Why would you insert a qaid here when God has not brought you a qaid in this particular ayah? So that is a very sensible kind of approach in terms of what you consider to be the default, and then reasons why you might go in the other direction, right? It would have to be built on evidence. You don't ask, why are you taking this as am, right? Or rather, well, it's am, the word is am, until proven otherwise, right? Why are you taking this as mutlaq? Why don't you assume that there's a qaid? Well, it is mutlaq until proven muqayyad, okay? Why are you assuming that these words are in order? Because that's what you do. If you're a sensible human being, you assume that the words are in order unless there is evidence that the words are supposed to be understood in a different sequence or structure. هذا والله تعالى أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.